The signal came on a quiet Tuesday, just past midnight, when the stars above California seemed brighter than usual. No one noticed it at first, except a small observatory outside Joshua Tree, where a young intern named Casey Fields sat alone, sipping cold coffee and watching the monitors blink. It was supposed to be a routine night. She was just logging space data like she always did. But then a line of symbols scrolled across the screen, soft, pulsing, almost like a whisper from the dark. At first, she thought it was interference. Then she realized the symbols were too perfect, too measured. They repeated in threes. She tried to call her supervisor, but the call dropped. Outside, the night felt heavy. Even the wind had stopped. Casey saved the signal and sent it directly to the military contact listed on their emergency protocol. She had no idea she had just woken something buried deep beneath Earth's silence. Within 6 hours, the entire observatory was surrounded by black trucks. Men in dark uniforms confiscated everything: computers, notebooks, even Casey's phone. She was escorted out without a word. That same day, every telescope feed across the globe that caught the signal suddenly went dark. No news reported it. No one mentioned it online. It was like the universe had blinked, and only a few saw it. But a week later, on a hidden moon of the Yelanda system, 44 light-years away, the message was received. The alien race known as the Alari had been watching Earth for decades, studying, scanning, preparing. The signal was not from them, but it reached them. And what they read made them freeze. The symbols were ancient, older than their own language. It was a warning: do not come. Earth is sealed. The Alari Council laughed at first. How could a primitive planet seal itself from the stars? But one of their oldest scholars, a creature with skin like whetstone and eyes that glowed, went pale. He had seen those markings before in the ruins of the Lost World, a place their ancestors had erased from maps. The markings meant death. They meant something beneath Earth wasn't sleeping, it was locked. And the key had just been touched. Still, the Alari were proud, bold, and curious. They launched a scout ship to investigate, breaking the old warning. Their vessel slipped into Earth's orbit without detection, cloaked in silence, and hovered above the Pacific. But something strange happened. The moment they scanned below the ocean surface, something scanned back. Not a radar, not a satellite, something alive. One of the alien crew screamed before collapsing. Another began bleeding from the eyes. The ship tried to pull back, but the engines failed. Earth had grabbed them. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Casey began having visions. She'd see stars moving in patterns, hear voices when she closed her eyes. A stranger followed her on the train, whispering words she didn't understand. She tried to leave town, but her car wouldn't start. Every time she turned on the TV, the signal flashed again for just a second. Those same symbols, now burned into her memory. She was not alone. Hundreds of people around the world, those who caught even a glimpse of the signal, were starting to change. Some disappeared. Some drew strange maps on their walls and spoke in languages no human had ever known. In Washington, military leaders held emergency meetings in underground bunkers. The president was briefed: an unknown force had latched onto Earth's orbit. Satellite footage showed the alien craft frozen mid-air, glowing red, like it was being held. And then came the voice. Across every channel, radio, and phone, at the exact same moment, a whisper in perfect English: they were warned. You will be next. People panicked. The world thought aliens had declared war. But the truth was worse. Earth wasn't being invaded. It was being protected. Because buried beneath the oceans, under layers of rock older than time, something once called the Keeper was waking. It had been waiting. It had been guarding. And now that someone had tried to break the seal, it had chosen its first host: Casey. Her eyes changed that night. They weren't blue anymore. They glowed like the stars. and in a voice not fully her own, she whispered, "They were told to stay away. Now, they'll never leave." Casey didn't sleep after that night. She couldn't. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw the sky splitting open, stars rearranging themselves like puzzle pieces, and something vast moving just beyond the edge of the atmosphere. It wasn't a dream. It was real. The voice inside her head was not hers anymore, though it still used her voice when she spoke. She walked differently. She no longer felt fear or hunger. She could feel machines without touching them, read the emotions of people walking past her, and sometimes if she stared too long at a light bulb it would explode. Casey's parents were worried, but she smiled and told them she was fine. She even hugged them longer than usual, not because she felt safe with them, but because something deep inside her knew, she might not see them again. 3,000 miles away, in a military command center hidden beneath the Colorado Rockies, General Arden Locke stared at a frozen image on the screen. It was the alien craft, the Alari scout ship, still hovering above the Pacific Ocean, unmoving, no visible damage, but clearly disabled. Every attempt to communicate with it had failed. Even nukes were prepped as a last resort, but something stopped them from being launched. Literally. The systems wouldn't respond. Power failed every time someone tried to act aggressively toward the ship. Arden had never believed in magic. But this wasn't magic. It was control. Something, somewhere, was overriding Earth's most secure systems like they were toys. And that wasn't all. People across the globe were changing. Reports came in from Australia, Brazil, Russia, and India. Men and women who had seen the forbidden signal were showing signs of shared dreams, spontaneous nosebleeds, and in one case, levitation. Every one of them described seeing a gate in the sky. Every one of them had drawn the same symbol. It was the same warning the aliens ignored. Back in California, Casey found herself walking toward the desert. She didn't know why, but her legs moved with purpose. She felt heat, but it didn't burn her. She walked for hours without water, her skin glowing faintly under the moonlight. Something was calling her. Not in words. In pulls. Like tides in her blood. In the distance, a storm brewed over the mountains, yet no weather radar picked it up. The clouds were wrong. They pulsed in rhythm. Above her, satellites quietly shifted out of alignment, like something was pushing them aside. Earth's sky was changing, not because of the aliens but because of her. Far above, the Alari Council watched with growing dread. Their scout ship hadn't returned. Their messages were met with silence. Worse, their long-range scanners picked up something horrifying, a pattern forming in Earth's ionosphere, one that matched an ancient frequency known only in forbidden Alari history. Long ago, their kind had tried to colonize a distant world. That world had sent back a signal that erased entire fleets. The frequency was called the thought of the first flame. It was not a weapon. It was a mind. A consciousness older than time, spread across hidden pockets of the universe. They thought it had died. They were wrong. It had simply waited. And Earth, for some reason, had become its final gate. As Casey walked deeper into the desert, she met others. 4 of them. Strangers at first glance. A man with frost on his shoulders despite the heat. A blind girl who said she could see light inside the earth. A woman who spoke only in whispers but knew Casey's name. And an old man, thin and dying, with a heartbeat so faint it made no sense that he was standing. They said nothing at first, only stared at Casey with sad, knowing eyes. Then the old man spoke. "We are the fragments," he said. "And you are the key." They camped under a shattered rock, where old carvings marked the wall, symbols identical to those from the signal. Casey traced them with her fingers, and as she did, the wind around her changed. It carried voices. Ancient chants. Screams. Whispers in languages never spoken by human tongues. "Why me?" she asked the group. The blind girl smiled. "Because Earth remembers." Meanwhile, chaos was building across the world. Some governments believed it was an alien invasion. Others blamed secret technology. Protests broke out. Planes were grounded. The internet became unstable. But in the confusion, no one noticed what was rising beneath the oceans. Deep under the Mariana Trench, sensors recorded a change in gravity, just a flicker at first, then a full shift. The trench, Earth's deepest wound, began to pulse like a heartbeat. Military drones sent to investigate vanished without trace. One camera caught a frame before it blinked out, a massive eye opening, wider than a football field, staring directly into the camera before it melted. The President of the United States went underground. So did the leaders of other nations. They formed a quiet alliance. Whatever this was, they agreed to silence it, even if it meant wiping out parts of the Earth. But something kept failing their weapons. Something was interfering. Casey. As she and the others reached a hidden plateau, the sky darkened. Not night, just wrong. The stars blinked one by one, as if looking away. Then a hum started. It wasn't loud. It was inside. Inside their bones, their thoughts, the cracks between atoms. The old man fell to his knees. "It's waking," he said, tears in his eyes. "It's finally waking." Casey stood still. She closed her eyes. Her feet lifted 2 inches from the ground. She saw everything at once: cities glowing like fireflies, people crying, the Alari ship still trapped in the sky, screaming in silence. She saw herself. And she saw the thing beneath Earth. It was not evil. It was not good. It was old. It had guarded this planet since before the moon existed. Long ago, something had come for Earth. Something monstrous. And Earth had made a choice. It had allowed the flame to sleep within it to keep the rest of the universe safe. But now, aliens had touched Earth again. And that broke the pact. The flame must rise. But it needed a voice. A mind. A human form. It had chosen Casey. Not because she was special, but because she was open. Because she listened. Because she had heard the first whisper. Casey turned to the others. "We must go to the ocean," she said. "To the deep place. That's where it will rise." They nodded. None of them asked why. They already knew. In the shadows of space, the Alari gathered warships, desperate to undo their mistake. But it was too late. Earth wasn't just fighting back. It was awakening. And when it was fully awake, no one would be able to leave. The Pacific Ocean stretched wide like an endless, living thing. Its waves rolled heavy and strange, as if something beneath them was shifting, breathing. Casey stood on the deck of a rusting cargo ship, wind tugging at her hair, her eyes fixed on the dark water ahead. The others stood beside her: the frost-covered man, the blind girl, the whispering woman, and the dying old man whose veins now glowed faintly under his skin. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. All 5 had been drawn by the same force, guided by dreams too vivid to be dreams. Somewhere below, in the world's deepest trench, something was waking. And it had called to them. Casey could feel it now, even more clearly than before: a rhythm, like drums beneath the earth, growing louder each day. Ships in the area had started disappearing, even planes flying overhead lost signal, as if the ocean itself had become a void. But Casey wasn't afraid. She felt no panic, no doubt, just the steady pull of purpose in her blood. She was changing more each day. Her skin sometimes shimmered faintly in the dark. Her hands could light up electronics with a touch. She no longer felt hunger, or cold, or sleep. She was becoming something else. 2 days earlier, the military had tried to stop them. A black helicopter intercepted their boat near Guam, warning them to turn around. but when a soldier aimed his weapon at Casey, it melted in his hands. No one spoke after that. The helicopter vanished into the clouds. Since then, no one had followed them. No one dared. The ocean seemed to protect them. And yet, they were not alone. From orbit, the Alari watched in panic. Their trapped scout ship above Earth had gone completely silent, now dark and motionless like a floating grave. The other Alari vessels orbiting nearby were afraid to intervene. Their most powerful telepaths screamed when they focused on Earth for too long. Their minds would fracture with images of burning skies and screaming worlds. Something ancient was speaking through Earth's electromagnetic field now, pulsing warnings in raw, unfiltered emotion. And yet, one ship, a massive command vessel, prepared to send a message anyway. The Alari were proud. They had faced cosmic beasts, collapsing stars, living black holes. They did not fear Earth. But they should have. As Casey stood at the bow, the ocean finally stilled. The air grew heavy and silent. Then she spoke, not with her voice, but with something inside her. "We're here." The others turned. Below them, sensors picked up a sudden drop in depth. A hole was opening in the ocean. Not a whirlpool, not a sinkhole, just absence. Water simply vanished, forming a perfectly circular shaft plunging deep into the sea. Lights flickered on the ship. The compass spun. Then they began to sink, not violently, but gently, like being lowered by invisible hands. The water didn't touch them. The ship descended slowly into the opening, past the point where light should not reach, but it did. Faint green and violet light glowed from below, like stars beneath the sea. Fish with too many eyes swam in spirals. Jellyfish the size of buses drifted past like ghosts. And then came the bones. Massive, broken bones of creatures long extinct, drifting slowly in the black. They weren't whale bones. They were older. Larger. Some still glowed with heat, as if they'd died moments ago, though their size stretched imagination. "This is where it started," the whispering woman said. "This is where Earth made its promise." Deeper still, the trench finally came into view. It was not natural. The walls were carved with symbols, glowing faintly, alive with movement. It was not rock. It was something else. Organic. Breathing. And at the center of the trench stood a structure, a tower that seemed to pulse like a heart. It was ancient and impossible, made of metal and stone and something in between, covered in symbols that moved when you looked at them. Casey stepped forward. Her eyes, once blue, were now silver. Her footsteps echoed even though the deck was silent. She pointed. "There," she said. "That's the door." Above them, in space, the Alari finally sent a beam of energy toward Earth. Not an attack, just a scan. But the moment it touched Earth's ionosphere, something responded. The stars around Earth blinked out, not from damage, but as if Earth had reached out and covered them. Then came the sound, a deep, vibrating tone that made space itself bend. The Alari vessel's engines overloaded. Their shields failed. And a single word appeared on every screen aboard the ship: "Enough." Then the signal cut. The ship was never heard from again. Back in the trench, the old man collapsed, his glowing veins fading. "It's ready," he whispered. Casey knelt beside him. "Thank you," she said. The old man smiled one last time, then faded, not dead, but gone, like smoke dissolving in light. His body had been a vessel too, only temporary. One by one, the others began to kneel as the tower's base cracked open. From beneath it, a light brighter than any sun began to rise. It was not fire. It was not electricity. It was consciousness. The flame. The guardian force Earth had buried beneath itself to survive. And now, it was no longer sleeping. The ship shook. The ocean trembled. Earth itself seemed to sigh. Casey stepped forward, arms open, and the light touched her. Her scream echoed through water and air and thought. But it wasn't a scream of pain. It was merging. The human and the ancient becoming one. She saw everything: the beginning of Earth, the battles fought above it before humans even crawled from the sea, the dying of stars, the betrayal of alien races who had once tried to claim this world. And how Earth had made a pact with the flame, to protect, to hide, to wait. Now the waiting was over. When the light faded, Casey was gone. In her place stood something new, still human in shape, but glowing with impossible energy, her hair flowing like strands of night sky, her voice layered with echoes of billions. She looked at her companions, now kneeling. "You were never alone," she said. "Earth remembers." Then she looked upward. Through miles of water, stone, and sky, she looked straight into space. They broke the seal. Now they cannot leave. And in orbit, Ilari warships began to vanish, one by one. Above Earth, space no longer felt empty. It felt like a mind. A presence. Every Ilari ship that had tried to orbit the planet now floated in silence, either stripped of power or swallowed by something unseen. Inside the Ilari command cruiser, the last ship still functioning, Captain Nearin paced nervously. He had served in countless Star Wars, had stared into the face of dying suns and rogue machines, but nothing had prepared him for this. His ship was trembling, though no force had touched it. He could hear whispers in the hull, like voices caught between layers of time. All screens showed the same message in bold, pulsing glyphs: "You were warned." Around him, his crew was breaking. Their navigator curled into a ball, eyes wide and unblinking, whispering about a girl with burning eyes. The ship's AI, once flawless, had crashed 6 times in an hour, and now displayed only a single spinning star. Desperation crept in. Captain Nearin gave the order to retreat, to leave Earth's orbit and warn the rest of the Ilari Empire. But the engines refused to ignite. It was as if space itself held them down. They were not allowed to leave. Below them, on Earth, the new being once known as Casey stood silently on the surface of the sea, though the ocean no longer moved around her. Her feet didn't touch water. She simply existed there, in stillness, glowing with the power of the awakened flame. Her companions remained on the ship above the trench, watching from afar. None dared approach. The whispering woman cried softly, not out of fear, but awe. "She's no longer one of us," she whispered. "She's become what Earth remembers." In the days that followed, the world began to change. No explosions. No battles. Just silence. Radio waves became filled with soft tones, resembling lullabies in forgotten languages. Machines began acting strange, not malfunctioning, but responding to feelings, thoughts. People who had seen the signal began to change more rapidly. A boy in Tokyo could control light with a glance. A girl in Morocco dreamed of entire galaxies and woke up drawing maps to places that didn't exist until telescopes found them. But these weren't powers. They were echoes. Earth was broadcasting memories, and some humans, those open enough, were receiving them. Governments struggled to understand. They wanted to fight, but how do you fight something that lives in the planet itself? Nuclear silos were locked without codes. Drones crashed before liftoff. Satellites slowly drifted back into Earth's gravity, as if summoned home. And every time someone spoke of attacking, of reclaiming control, the Earth responded not with violence, but with warning. Dreams of fire. Blood in reflections. Hands reaching from cracks in walls. Whispers in every language ever spoken. But not everyone wanted peace. In a hidden facility in Greenland, a group of world leaders, engineers, and former intelligence officers created Project Skyfall, a last-ditch attempt to build a weapon that could disable Earth's magnetic field and destroy whatever intelligence had awakened. They believed that by collapsing Earth's core, they could sever the flame's connection. They called it salvation. They called it necessary. But they were wrong. Their construction site, buried under frozen cliffs, thrived in secrecy for 3 days until Casey appeared. She didn't walk in. She simply stood in the center of the control room, without opening a door, her eyes glowing like burning silver. The guards aimed weapons, but their arms froze in midair. The lights dimmed. And then she spoke, not loud, but deep, layered, like multiple voices woven into one. This world has bled too much. You will not wound it again. One man tried to argue. He said Earth was becoming a prison. He begged her to understand that humanity was afraid. Her gaze softened for just a second and then she said, "So was I." Before I listened. The machines melted. The facility caved in. No one died. But no one could speak again. Not one word. They returned to their homes in silence, their voices stolen by the very planet they tried to harm. Above, Captain Nerin made one last attempt. He called for help from beyond the star systems, from the hidden outposts of the Alari fleet. His message was brief: do not come. We have touched something ancient. It does not forgive. But the message never left. Somewhere between thought and transmission, it was erased. Then his ship began to sink, not downward, but inward. Space folded in strange ways around Earth now. The stars near the planet bent like mirrors, and ships caught in its orbit twisted into themselves, like paper burning without flame. Captain Nerin stood on his bridge, watching his crew dissolve into light, one by one, not screaming, just fading. He was the last. Before the silence took him, he looked down at Earth and whispered, "We should have listened." Back on the surface, the world began to adjust. Storms calmed. Animals gathered in strange formations. Birds flew in spirals above ancient sites, Stonehenge, the pyramids, places built long before modern memory. And beneath each site, Earth pulsed faintly with life, like the heartbeat of something vast, watching. Casey, now more flame than girl, returned to the desert, where it all began. She stood atop a cliff near the observatory where she had once worked. Below her, the stars moved in slow, deliberate paths. One by one, people began to gather around her, those who had changed, those who had been touched by the signal. They didn't speak. They didn't kneel. They simply stood, waiting. And when the time was right, Casey raised her hand toward the sky. In the distance, something shimmered. A hole opened, not a portal, not a rip, but a memory made real. Through it, they saw another world, burning. A place the Alari had destroyed long ago. A voice, not hers, not Earth's, but something older, whispered through the world like wind. They did not listen. But you still can. And then the vision faded. The message was clear. The flame had awakened not to conquer, but to warn. Earth had always been more than a planet. It had been a guardian, a memory bank, a final shelter. And now, it would allow no more harm. To humans. To itself. To the stars. The world had grown quieter. Cities still moved, but slower. People still spoke, but softer. Planes still flew, but with caution. Satellites no longer drifted freely, but followed strange orbits as if pulled by invisible tides. Something had changed, not only in the sky, not only in the oceans, but in the hearts of people. The awakening of the flame, now bonded with what was once Casey, had left a mark on humanity. People began to feel connected in ways they couldn't explain. Strangers dreamt the same dreams. Children drew symbols they had never seen before, yet all were the same: spirals within circles, lines that bent toward unseen stars. Governments struggled to maintain control. What do you govern when the rules have shifted beneath your feet? Power grids failed only when greed sparked them. Weapons refused to launch when powered by anger. The Earth was not just watching anymore. It was choosing. And somewhere deep in the minds of the people, They knew, this was not punishment. This was correction. Casey no longer lived in one place. She moved across continents in moments, not by machine, not by teleportation, but by something older like folding a page and stepping across it. Sometimes she walked through cities with a quiet glow. Sometimes she stood alone atop mountains that had never felt a footprint. She listened more than she spoke. And when she did speak, things changed. Crops grew faster. Rivers shifted course. The air in polluted cities cleared in hours. Yet the world still held its doubts. Not everyone accepted what she had become. In a secret lab beneath Iceland's volcano fields, a group of scientists, those who had once helped design Project Skyfall, continued to study her energy signature. They believed she was a threat. That this ancient force was not meant to live inside a human form. "It's changing her too much," said Dr. Ellen Varn, a brilliant mind and deeply afraid. "She is becoming the Earth. If we don't act soon, there may be no humans left, only echoes of her." They designed a machine unlike any before, a quantum frequency disruptor built to sever the flame's bond with Casey. But to do it, they needed to draw her in. So they activated a signal, disguised as distress, from the wreckage of a ship lost in the Arctic. They knew she would come. She did. She stepped into their frozen trap without fear, her glowing form shimmering like starlight on ice. "Why have you called me?" she asked, though she already knew. "We need to restore balance," Dr. Varn replied, voice trembling. "You're not human anymore." For the first time, a flicker of sadness passed through Casey's eyes. "I was never just human," she said. "None of us are. We've always been something more. Earth remembers, even when we forget." Then they activated the disruptor. The room filled with violent pulses. The walls cracked. The air turned solid with sound. Casey screamed, and for a moment, her light dimmed. Her form flickered. But she did not fall. Instead, the earth responded. The ice beneath the lab shattered. The volcano above them groaned. Lava did not rise, but roots did. Giant, ancient roots burst through the floor, glowing with heat and memory. They wrapped around the machine and crushed it. The lights died. Dr. Varn fell to her knees. "We were only trying to save the world," she whispered. Casey approached her, no longer angry, just tired. "You still think the world is yours," she said gently. "But you are part of it. You don't save it by killing what keeps it alive." She left the lab untouched. No one was harmed. But when the scientists looked up at the sky, it was changed. A constellation above the Arctic now glowed faintly in the shape of a spiral, the same symbol from the signal. A reminder. A mark of mercy. Back in Africa, the blind girl from the desert, one of the 5 fragments, awoke from a deep sleep. She had not spoken since the awakening. But now she whispered, "It's beginning." The others, those scattered around the globe who had once followed Casey, also stirred. Their bodies still human, but their spirits now aligned to something greater. They were not gods. They were not chosen. They were listeners, and Earth had more to say. At the same time, far beyond the solar system, distant civilizations watched Earth with growing fear. The Alari Empire, now fractured after the loss of their expedition, sent no more ships. Instead, they sent messages, apologies, pleas, records of history. But no response ever came. Because Earth was not interested in apologies. It was only interested in truth. In the balance that had been broken and was now being restored. Across the oceans, certain places began to glow, places that had been forgotten for centuries. Underwater ruins rose near Bermuda. Forests parted to reveal stone altars hidden beneath moss. The old places, the sacred places, were returning. And in those places, people began to gather. Not for worship, but for remembrance. Stories long buried in bones and dreams began to surface. Stories of when Earth first spoke to humanity, long before language. Of the pact made in silence, when the flame first came to rest beneath the crust. Casey now stood at the heart of that pact. Not its master. Not its leader. But its voice. In the final days of this part of the awakening, she returned to where it began, the observatory. It stood empty now, abandoned, surrounded by wind and stars. She entered alone, placed her hand on the first terminal that caught the signal. It sparked to life. Then she said, "It's time." From every point on Earth, the signal broadcast once more. The same one that had awakened the aliens. But this time, it was not a warning. It was an invitation. Not to other worlds. But to Earth's people. A choice. Stay in the world of noise and war or listen to the rhythm beneath your feet. The choice was quiet. Gentle. And yet, it reached every soul. Across borders. Across fear. Across time. And some, at last, began to listen. The night sky began to change. First, it was small things. The Big Dipper faded, the North Star stopped pointing north, and constellations that had guided humanity for thousands of years began to shift. Scientists tried to explain it as a magnetic anomaly, or some gravitational distortion caused by solar interference. But they knew the truth deep down. The stars were not moving. Earth was. It was tilting, slightly, almost like adjusting its focus. And in doing so, it turned its attention elsewhere. Space no longer looked the same because Earth wasn't looking in the same direction. This frightened people more than any alien invasion ever could. Telescopes pointed skyward returned static. Satellites lost orientation. Some came crashing down not by force, but gently, like falling feathers. Earth was reclaiming the sky. And only one being understood why. Casey. Or what remained of her. She stood now atop the ruins of a mountaintop village in Peru, barefoot on ancient stone, eyes glowing brighter than ever. A flock of birds circled overhead, silent and precise, forming a spiral in the air. Around her, the wind no longer obeyed the weather, it obeyed intention. She had not spoken in 3 days, but the whole world felt her silence. People gathered in open fields, forests, beaches, deserts. They sat without knowing why. They felt something stir inside them, a memory they'd never lived, a voice they'd never heard, telling them they belonged to something much older than countries and maps and names. They didn't speak. They just waited. In a glass skyscraper in New York, the president of the United Nations Emergency Coalition stared out the window, watching as the city dimmed. Not by blackout, but by agreement. People had begun turning off lights at night, without being told. Instinctively. As if they knew the Earth needed darkness for what was coming next. "What do we do?" an advisor asked. "Nothing," the president replied. "She's not asking permission anymore." Meanwhile, in Russia, a cosmonaut training center attempted to launch a test rocket, an old one, built before the signal ever appeared. The launch tower caught fire mid-countdown. The flames weren't natural. They burned in slow motion, shaped like leaves. The crew abandoned the mission. "The sky isn't open to us right now," one pilot whispered. Deep beneath the Himalayas, the last of the old Ilari probes activated. It had been buried there for centuries, a sleeper drone meant to awaken if Earth ever showed signs of technological dominance. But the signal it received now was not one of weapons or resistance. It was the same pattern sent to the stars weeks ago, an invitation, humming with warmth and sadness. The drone hesitated. Then, instead of activating its surveillance program, it folded itself inward and turned to dust. It had chosen peace. Not even a machine could ignore the voice now pulsing through the crust of the Earth. Back in Peru, Casey took a single step forward, and the air shimmered. A ripple spread from her foot like water across glass. Far away, trees bowed slightly. Birds landed in rows on rooftops. People all across the world looked up at once, sensing something. The sky was dim, but not dark. It wasn't nighttime. It was waiting. And then, slowly, the stars began to return, but they were different. They appeared in unfamiliar patterns, constellations that had no names, no legends. They were symbols. The same ones from the original signal. The sky was no longer a map of distance, but a message. One that only Earth could write. At the bottom of the Pacific, in the great trench where Casey had first merged with the flame, something cracked. A thin line of white light split the ocean floor. It didn't release smoke or magma but sound. A tone so low, only whales could hear it. But across the globe, certain people, those who had heard the signal, felt it in their teeth, in their bones. They began to hum in unison. Not loud, but deeply. Even children. Even the blind girl from the desert, now living quietly near Mount Kenya, stood up and sang a note she had never learned. The earth was tuning itself. Preparing. Remembering. It wasn't a weapon. It was a story one long held in silence, finally ready to be told. But not everyone waited in peace. In a hidden base near Argentina, a rogue group of surviving Ilari scientists activated their last prototype, a memory disruptor that could, in theory, sever Earth's psychic transmission to its people. They believed the flame was rewriting humanity, turning them into extensions of itself. They called it assimilation. They feared the loss of individuality. "We are not this planet's children," one of them said. "We must remain ourselves." They aimed their device toward the atmosphere, calculating the signal's harmonic wave. And just before activation, the power failed. Then the floor cracked open. A hand, not human, not alien, but stone and moss and flame, rose from beneath. The lead scientist screamed as the hand touched him gently. His eyes turned silver. He fell to his knees. "I was wrong," he whispered. The machine melted into pollen. The base filled with light. And no one ever spoke of it again. Above the clouds, the Ilari Empire sent one final message to Earth. It contained no threats. Only a question. "What do you want from us?" The message was received not by satellites, but through the thoughts of those listening, Casey included. Her reply was broadcast through dreams, through falling leaves, through patterns in fire and ice. "We want you to listen. We want you to remember. We want you to stop running." The Ilari did not reply. On Earth, people continued gathering. They built no monuments. They held no ceremonies. They simply waited as the stars shifted and the skies rewrote themselves. Casey stood alone now, her hair flowing like a shadow of light, her body humming with energy too vast to name. The flame within her had changed shape again. It was no longer just memory. It was becoming future. And the future it saw was not war. Not conquest. But understanding. Something Earth had not had in a long time. In the final moments of that night, the stars went completely still. Not a flicker. Not a pulse. Then, in the space above Earth, something opened. Not a ship. Not a portal. A mirror. In it, everyone on Earth saw something different. Some saw lost loved ones. Others saw the first sun rise. A few saw the universe being born. It was not a vision. It was Earth's final memory. A gift. And when it faded, Casey whispered just one word into the wind: begin. The world changed after the mirror in the sky disappeared. It didn't return to normal because there was no normal left to return to. Streets were quiet, but not from fear. Cities were dim, but not abandoned. Something had awakened in people, something they didn't know how to explain. It was like the Earth had whispered a secret into every soul, and now they all carried it, even if they didn't understand it yet. People slept less. Not from anxiety, but from a strange pull, like they were being gently kept awake by something beneath the soil. They felt a vibration in their dreams, like music just out of reach. Farmers in Nebraska swore their crops were growing in patterns they hadn't planted. Old statues in Egypt began humming softly when touched. In Tokyo, a child drew a map she had never seen before. When scientists analyzed it, they realized it matched the magnetic field surrounding Earth. The planet was alive, not just in a biological way, but aware. It wasn't angry. It wasn't violent. But it was waking up, and it didn't want to be alone anymore. And still, no one could sleep properly. Casey hadn't spoken in 10 days. She didn't need to. Her body had become the bridge between Earth's core and the sky above it. She moved through the Andes with steps that made trees bend and birds follow. Wherever she went, strange phenomena followed. Fire burned cold. Snow fell upward. Once, she stood in a lake, and the water held her like glass. She was no longer just a girl. She was the memory of Earth wearing human skin. People started calling her the Hollow Flame, not because she was empty, but because she had made space for something much greater inside her. Even animals sensed her presence. Wolves sat in silence beside her. Whales changed their songs. Even the insects changed the way they moved, forming patterns like sacred symbols only the sky could read. But Earth wasn't just changing itself, it was preparing for something. Something that hadn't happened in a very long time. Above the atmosphere, in the void where satellites once spun, the Alari watched in silence. Their empire stretched across 6 galaxies, but no other planet had ever done what Earth was doing now. None had rejected domination with silence. None had answered violence with memory. The High Speaker of the Alari Council stood before the last surviving war mind and asked the question that none of them wanted to face: what if this planet is not a battlefield, but a library? The war mind didn't answer. It just blinked slowly, processing millions of years of data, before softly replying, "Then we are not conquerors. We are children breaking into our ancestors' house." On Earth, Casey led a group of dreamers, people who had seen the mirror and hadn't spoken since. They wandered through an abandoned city in South Africa, moving silently, each step echoing like a drum beat. People watched from windows but didn't dare interrupt. The group stopped at a crumbling school and sat cross-legged on the floor. One by one, they placed their hands on the ground. And then the entire city trembled, not from an earthquake, but from a memory bursting through the layers of time. Buildings flickered, showing glimpses of the past. Laughter from children long gone. Smoke from fires long burned out. In those few minutes, the city remembered itself and then returned to silence. The dreamers rose and walked on. Meanwhile, in a deep-sea lab off the coast of Chile, a scientist named Dr. Lena Rojas isolated a sound that Earth had been humming for days. It was not a constant tone but a rhythm. A repeating sequence. When she mapped it out visually, it looked like a spiral of light, pulsing gently outward. "It's not just sound," she whispered. "It's an invitation. Earth is inviting something here." Her colleague asked, "Something from where?" Lena didn't know. But she felt it in her teeth, in her breath, in her bones. Earth wasn't just remembering. It was calling. Something or someone was coming. In orbit, the Alari struggled to make a decision. Retreat would be shameful. Attack would be suicidal. Their ships had not been harmed by force, but by forgetfulness. Sensors no longer worked near Earth. Weapons misfired. Pilots reported losing memories mid-flight. One captain forgot her own name while approaching Earth's atmosphere. The planet was defending itself, not with lasers, but with silence so deep it erased thoughts. One general proposed a planetary quarantine. But the High Speaker overruled it. "We came to subdue a species," he said, "but found a being older than war." And so the ships drifted in orbit, unsure of whether they were still invaders, or pilgrims. Back on Earth, something strange happened at the poles. Both north and south began to glow not with sunlight, but with symbols. Gigantic shapes formed in the ice, visible from space. They pulsed like a heartbeat. Scientists couldn't decipher the language, but Casey knew. She stood in the Arctic wind and whispered, "These are coordinates. Not to a place, but to a time." Earth was marking the sky, carving its memories into the atmosphere. She reached out her hand, and the snow stopped midair. Time around her bent slightly. For a moment, it wasn't 2025 anymore, it was everything. All at once. Past and future layered over the present like a song with too many verses. And in that moment, Casey cried. Not from pain, but from love too big to hold. In Brazil, a boy named Mateo who hadn't spoken since birth suddenly began to sing. Not in Portuguese. Not in any known language. But his song made flowers bloom out of season and stopped rain in midair. People gathered around him in awe. When asked how he knew the words, he said, "The dirt told me." And no one laughed. Because they all believed him. Across the world, more people like Mateo emerged. They weren't prophets. They weren't gods. They were echoes, living reminders of what Earth once was before cities and wars and machines. These people didn't ask for power. They just listened. And through them, Earth remembered. It remembered when it first formed, when its crust cooled, when the moon was born. It remembered the first creatures, the first pain, the first joy. It remembered being alone. And it didn't want to be alone anymore. That night, the stars dimmed again. Not from darkness but because something brighter was coming. In the sky, a light appeared. Not a ship. Not a flame. But something older. It moved like thought. It sang without sound. It made every tree lean slightly toward the sky. Casey stood on a cliffside and opened her arms. The light did not land. It merged. With the air. With the water. With the soil. And the earth sighed. Not in fear. But in relief. It was no longer waiting. What it had called for, had finally arrived. And yet, the world did not explode. No armies marched. No gods appeared. Instead, people began to dream again. But this time, their dreams showed not war or fear, but futures. Possibilities. Worlds where humans did not dominate, but listened. Where cities grew around forests, not over them. Where memory was not buried, but shared. Casey fell asleep for the first time in weeks. And in her sleep, she saw something beautiful, a world where no child ever asked, what happened to the stars? Because the stars were no longer above them. They were within. Earth did not become silent again, but it changed its kind of silence. It was no longer the silence of fear, or shock, or waiting. It was a silence like a held breath just before music begins. After the light entered the sky and merged with the air, strange peace washed across the planet like a soft wave. No explosions followed, no messages from the sky, no beams, or words. Just stillness. But in that stillness, something was moving. Not through the air or water but through the memory of things. Rocks began to remember their shape from long ago and shifted slightly. Trees leaned in directions they had not grown before. People began to dream things they had no way of knowing, names of stars beyond human telescopes, stories that did not exist in any book, and memories that felt older than the sun. The earth had been holding these stories inside for so long, and now, finally, it began to share them. Casey awoke from the longest sleep she had ever known. When she opened her eyes, the sky wasn't the same. It was still blue, still warm, but it shimmered slightly, like something just beyond it was watching kindly. She sat up in the field where she had fallen asleep, and beside her were others, people like Mateo, the boy who sang to the dirt, and Lena, the scientist who heard Earth's heartbeat in sound waves. None of them spoke at first. But they felt the same thing, the planet wasn't just a home now. It was awake, fully and completely, and it had made them part of itself. They didn't glow, didn't float, didn't grow wings. They simply understood, like someone had quietly placed every answer into their hands without needing to explain a thing. The memories weren't like human memories. They didn't come in pictures or sounds. They came as knowing that the earth had been watching, that it had been hurt before, that it had loved, once, and lost, and that it had never forgotten. Around the world, strange signs appeared. Not in the sky, but in everyday places. A mountain cracked open in Tibet to reveal a spiral cave no one had ever seen. Inside, murals glowed faintly with colors unknown to the human eye, and when touched, they made people cry. In a desert in Algeria, an entire lake formed overnight in the shape of a perfect circle, and the water hummed when people whispered to it. In the ruins of an ancient city in Peru, a stone door melted into soft light when touched by a child. No one controlled these events. No one claimed responsibility. Governments tried to explain, to contain, to test, but the earth didn't answer them. It only answered those who listened. The Alari fleet still hovered in orbit, silent. Their sensors failed to track anything. Their communications filled with echoes and half-words. Their leaders were frightened not of weapons, but of something they didn't understand. "What kind of species is this?" one of them asked. The high speaker, now much quieter than he had been before, replied, "Not a species. A planet. And we have been trespassing in its dream." They no longer saw Earth as weak. They saw it as sacred. But they didn't know what to do. Retreat meant failure. Attack meant madness. So they did the only thing they could, they waited. And Earth remembered them. One night, without warning, a single beam of white light reached into space, not a weapon, not a signal. Just light. Pure and quiet. It touched one of the Alari ships and passed through it like mist. When it left, the crew inside had changed. They didn't remember their orders. They remembered something else, images of planets long gone, the faces of creatures they destroyed centuries ago, the soft cries of stars they'd ignored. And for the first time, the Alari felt something deeper than fear. They felt sorrow. The ship turned slowly and began to move away. Not in retreat but in respect. Back on Earth, Casey stood on a hill where a strange tree had grown overnight. It had no leaves, but glowed with veins of soft gold. It pulsed like a heartbeat. As she touched its trunk, her fingers sank slightly, not like wood, but like memory itself was welcoming her. And in her mind, she saw it all, the first lightning over ancient oceans, the rise of the first dreamers before language, the long quiet of the ice ages, the stars circling silently as humans built and broke and built again. Earth had waited so long for someone to ask, not for power, but for its story. And now, it was telling it. Not in words, but in being. Mateo sang once more, this time on a global broadcast. Governments allowed it. People stopped what they were doing and listened. The song had no translation. But as it played, people wept. Not out of sadness, but because they remembered something too. The first time they felt rain, the sound of a parent's voice, the warmth of a fire in winter. The song wasn't from Earth alone. It was from everyone. It was the memory of being alive. Then came the final shift. The stars realigned. It wasn't a sudden event. No explosions. No screaming winds. But astronomers noticed it. Constellations that had never moved shifted slightly, just a few degrees. Enough to form a new symbol in the sky. It matched the glowing spiral seen at the poles. Earth had added its name to the galaxy. Not as a place of war, but as a memory keeper. A being that held the past of everything it had ever touched. Aliens would no longer approach Earth with conquest in their hearts. they would come with questions. And if they came to harm, they would forget why. Because Earth remembered too much to allow hatred again. In the final days of this awakening, Casey disappeared not in death, not in vanishing, but into the earth itself. Her body became roots. Her voice became wind. Her eyes became the stillness in a storm. And across the world, whenever someone stood still and listened, they heard her not as words, but as knowing. That Earth was not alone anymore. That the galaxy had finally heard it. That no one who attacked Earth would be allowed to leave, not because of violence, but because the planet would place itself inside them. And they would never be able to forget what they had touched. The message was now clear, even without language. They told the aliens to stay away from Earth. Now we know why.